any members or officers in physical attendance with an electronic device to mute it to avoid feedback. Could I also ask any remote participants to keep their camera and microphone switched off unless they wish to speak, and ideally to refrain from using the camera facility at all, as this can affect the quality for the virtual attendees at the meeting. The meeting may be recorded, and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy. Recording of the meeting may also be added to the Council's website. Excuse me. Members accessing the meeting remotely should use their Swilborough Council or KCC laptop to participate virtually, as if you join using the link on the website or on a mobile and tablet device, it is not always possible to identify you. You may not be recorded as being in remote attendance. Could I request that members speak loudly and clearly into their microphones and switch their microphone off after speaking? Otherwise, remote participants may be unable to hear the next speaker. So first of all, can I welcome everyone to the Policy and Resources Committee meeting, including the visiting members attending remotely and members of the public. The following staff are in attendance, either in the meeting room or remotely. The Chief Executive, Larissa Reid, Director of Resources, Lisa Fillery, Director of Regeneration and Neighbourhoods, Emma Wiggins, excuse me, the Monitor Officer, Robin Harris, Head of Finance and Procurement, Claire Stanbury, Head of Housing and Community Services, Charlotte Hudson, Head of Regeneration, Economic Development and Property, and Interim Head of Planning, John Johnson, Communications and Policy Manager, Phil Sutcliffe, Active Travel Coordinator, Adrian Oliver, Policy and Engagement Officer, Janet Dart, and Democratic Services Officer, Kelly Mackenzie. No fire drill is planned this evening, and accordingly, if the alarm sounds, those in attendance should leave via the exits indicated and assemble outside at the assembly point as directed, and no one should re-enter the building until it's been announced that it's safe to do so. Please note that lifts must not be used when evacuating, and if there's anyone who may need assistance, please can you now make yourself known to me. Probably with me tonight, I think. Are there any apologies for absence and confirmation of any substitutes, please?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillor Mike Baldock, and also just to advise that Councillor Julian Speed is in attendance but remotely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, is it your wish that I approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of October, minute numbers 356 to 372, as a correct record? Thank you, members. Excuse me. Are there any declarations of apologies, Councillor Bowen? Sorry.
So before we actually get into the main core of the business as well, and apologies, just say also welcome back to you. It's really, I think it's really good to see you back in your place. Although you're feeling unwell, but it's nice to see you back and on the road to recovery. So
thank you, much appreciated, and thank you for your support throughout the time of absence. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest, members, please? Councillor Henderson.
Yeah. In item 9, Mr. Chairman, I may have a declaration of non-pecuniary interest, as I am a director and trustee of House and Swimming Pools, and I may wish to raise an issue.
Thank you.
Right.
Item 9.
Apologies, Mr. Chairman. I thought Councillor Henderson said item 9, which is the nightly paid temporary accommodation. Thanks.
My apologies, item 7.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Thank you for clarification, Councillor Harrison. So now move on to item 5, which is a constitution amendments to various. Ask our officer to introduce the report, and then if there's any questions, I'll call in after. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm at a slight disadvantage at the moment because my computer is not picking up the internet, and trying to do the report off the computer when there is no internet means I'm going to challenge myself now to do it from memory. So we have 4 potential amendments which we are asking the committee to consider this evening and to potentially recommend to full council for inclusion in the constitution. The first 2 of those amendments was in relation to requests that came specifically from this committee. And so I'll take those in relatively short order. The first one was in relation to the frequency of financial reporting coming to this committee, because after the committee meeting in July of this year, there was an issue in relation to members effectively talking about data which had been superseded by the committee having adopted a new budget. And so the suggestion that's being put forward is that rather than receiving quarterly reports and therefore receiving a report which is outdated by the time it comes to this committee, that the committee instead receives half-yearly reports at an appropriate time, which is agreed between the committee chairman and the director of finance. So the only actual change to the constitution is to change the wording from, and we talked about whether we wanted biannual. We decided that that's one of those mischief weasel words that people confuse, whether it's twice a year or once every 2 years. And so actually, even having gone beyond the Constitution Working Group, suggested half yearly, because we think that can't possibly be misinterpreted, although it remains to be seen. So that's the first amendment, to go for reporting on financial matters to this committee on a half-yearly basis. The second amendment that this committee asked the Constitution Working Group to look at was in respect of when matters are dealt with for noting. This actually came from the peer review in respect of, they felt that a lot of matters went to committees to be noted. It created work for committees that was unnecessary. And so if you look at the papers at Amendment 2, there's a suggestion in relation to papers can still go to committees for noting, but actually in the alternative, the relevant committee chairman can agree with the officer that they could be disseminated in some other way, and the fact that the information has been sent out would be reported to a committee. My memory's struggling a little bit now, but I think the third one is in respect of member training, and it was noted by a member that compulsory requirement for licensing training for members, and that the member felt that this was potentially unnecessary. On looking at the Constitution, there are actually numerous references to training of members on various different things within the Constitution. And so what the Constitution Working Group agreed to put forward as an amendment for the time being was simply to remove that in respect of the licensing committee, but to move it so that there would be a requirement for training for people who are going to sit on a licensing subcommittee. And then that brings us to the second recommendation of the report, which was for this committee to consider whether they would like to ask Democratic Services to bring a paper to this committee on the wider issue of member training, rather than to change that. I think I'm doing quite well. I wasn't going to say any more on that. And the fourth amendment is in relation to the contract standing orders, and to change the requirement for the checking of credit references onto from contracts worth over £30,000 to contracts worth over £120,000, with the specific wording suggested being in your papers at page 10. So those are the recommendations and the proposed amendments. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Councillor Boyne, please.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Robin, for that. Any comments? Anyone come as any surprise? Amendment 3 about the member training. It's come back to the report maybe from Democratic Services. I think we are cutting ourselves, almost cutting our nose to spite our face to a degree, if we restrict panel members to be, or to have to be, members of that particular committee, and then also have the training. Eventually, if you start having to build, you could very quickly run out of potential members. So I would prefer, similar to planning, I think, where you can have members plan who don't sit on the planning committee. So I think it'd be better long term to offer the training to any or all members who might be interested, who may not sit on the licensing committee, but if they wanted to, or were asked, could, in theory, because they have been trained, sit on the hearings. I would certainly welcome that. Thank you. Oh, sorry, my other one. Sorry, Amendment 4, this won't come as any surprise. I can understand the rationale behind the increase to 120,000. As I said at previous meetings, I don't agree with it. I think from a residents' public point of view, that is an increase at this time where people are looking to make savings and counting almost every penny they have in their pocket, to suddenly change the overview that we have as a council from what we currently have and multiplying it by 4, I think goes in the wrong direction. But I do understand the idea behind it. I just think from a public perspective, it'll be why. Simple as that. Thank you.
Lisa, do you-
Yeah, not the training one, the money one. So the 120,000 is then in line with our contract standing orders and the thresholds that we have within that. And this recommendation is so that it is in line with, there are other ways in which the contracts are monitored that this information is in addition to and doesn't really add to. So the financial performance of an organisation is reported retrospectively, and so we would have other indicators that the contract monitoring and the service delivery side would pick up way in advance of this. So the other methods are way better at monitoring, and so this is just catching up with that, and it is in line with our contract standing orders. So it's not diminishing the position, because there are other way better ways of monitoring the performance of the contractor than their financial position. And most of our contracts are payment in arrears, so we wouldn't be paying for something in advance, but then somebody went bust and wouldn't be able to deliver. So it's kind of just making a more efficient process, because there are other much better, more robust oversight measures in place other than this one.
Thank you. Councillor Whiting, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start by just going on? If I take them backwards, if I may. So we'll take number 4 first. I agree with Councillor Byrne. I think it is too high, but I do accept what's been said by the officer in respect of that, and there are other ways of reporting some of this stuff, which will bring me nicely into Amendment 1 shortly, because that's presumably one of the things that the officer was thinking about. In Amendment 3, I again agree with Lloyd, and I thought actually when we talked about this at the previous committee, I thought that we'd kind of agreed that there would be 3 members of the council appropriately trained would be able to sit on the licensing subcommittees, not 3 members of the licensing committee only, because as Councillor Bowen says, Chairman, that would severely restricts the pool of people available to sit on these committees, on these subcommittees. So I don't know whether we're able to put in amendments at this stage before these get recommended through to full council, but I would certainly just like to amend 2434 to say that in the second line, committees each comprised of 3 members of the council who have received training on the relevant areas of licensing law. Sorry, I'm through you, Chair. I don't know what's being said over there. But somebody will come back, no doubt. Yes, but Amendment 2. I suppose I start with the question on Amendment 2, and assuming that we are presented with lists of either reports that have been agreed should just be noted, or things that have been circulated to members. If that list comes to this committee, for example, are we able to question that list? Are we able to say, actually, that report, I get that one member of the committee, the chairman, and the officers decided it was only for noting and not for discussion. It seems more of a cabinet system than a committee system to allow that. So while I'm not going to, I wouldn't stand in the way of having lists coming to us saying these are the things that we've noted, or these are the things that have been circulated. Doesn't seem to me in this built in any opportunity for members to say, actually, we would have liked to have seen a full report on that. We get that it's been put around for noting and that's the end of it. But actually, we don't think it is the end, and we think collectively that we should have a report on that. But there's no mechanism to do that in here, it seems. So my question would be, what is that mechanism? And if I could suggest one, it might be to simply add what's in this proposal into the list of motions that can be given without notice, because it then would allow us at this committee to put up a motion to simply say, well, we don't agree that this is for noting, we'd like to see it, please. And if the committee agree, then then that would happen. If they disagreed, we wouldn't. So my amendment to that would be that we somehow added these proposals to the list of things that we could offer an amendment without notice. And I'll just quickly take Amendment 1, if I may, then I'm done and dusted. I do disagree with this. The argument being put forward is that when we see these reports quarterly, they're out of date. But if we see them only every 6 months, then they're somehow more in date. And of course, they're not. Patently, they're going to be more out of date if we only see them every 6 months rather than we see them every 3 months. The reports are already written for SMT or the management team. And presumably they'll go to a committee chair or the IAM or something at some point. And I really see no reason why we shouldn't be seeing these reports on a quarterly basis as we do now, because simply pushing them, it again limits our options. In the good old, let's call them the good old cabinet days, an officer would meet with a cabinet member every week, and if there was something going wrong with the budget, they could say, sorry, we can't afford the grass cutting this month because we spent too much on trees. And somebody could say, well, don't stop cutting the grass. That's terrible. That's a silly idea. Do something else and keep cutting the grass. Now, we can't do that at the moment because we can't do that because we're a committee system. Those decisions have to come from us. And we can't do that unless we have started the figures on a reasonably regular basis as a committee. So I think quarterly, stick with what we've got quarterly. If we take it to 6 monthly, we will all be out the loop for months on end about where the spending's going and what decisions are being made to actually balance the budget at the end of the year. And they will still be out of date. So the initial premise of this report falls by the wayside anyway. So I appreciate your patience, but I've covered all four and I needn't speak again. Thank you.
We've got to bring our chief executive in.
Could I just ask, thank you, Councillor, could I just ask some clarification on Amendment 2? Could you give an example of what you think a report for noting that a chair and an officer might say for noting that you would want to see come here? Because I think what we're saying is in this, and what the peer review said is that the reasons for committees are for scrutiny and for scrutiny and decision, and that there are other mechanisms through members' updates to give all members information rather than just one committee. So I'm asking if you could help me understand what sort of things you think you would want to see reported here so we can understand it, because there would never be unless it's a delegated decision, a decision. But what we want to be mindful of is that we're not creating an industry of writing formal reports where we could do all member briefings or member updates that we could circulate to all members on a regular basis. Thank you, Chair.
If I may, Chair, to come back and answer the question, I absolutely agree with you, Larissa. No, we don't want hundreds of trees cut down so that we get reports that we simply read and do nothing with, and the meeting's over by 7:10. It doesn't make sense at all. I mean, but the performance review one is one where we were asked to note it. Now, under this, if this was written into the Constitution, that may not come to us at all. We would just either be sent round to us, or it would be decided by the chairman and yourself, presumably, that we don't need to see that, and it would just be for noting. And where we don't get to then input, at least when it's on paper on the agenda, we can talk about it. If we are saying that these noted reports will be listed on the agenda under an item, and we have the right then to talk about them, then that's great. But we won't have the information in front of us necessarily. So you asked for an example. There's one on the table now.
So if I may, Chair, So I think, I mean, obviously the performance report is for noting because there isn't a decision. We're not saying, is this our performance or isn't it? It is our performance. I think we can give quite easily, we can give a report that says these are the reports that have been for noting, but we've decided not to send. The chair and I wouldn't decide not to send a report for noting because the report just wouldn't be written. I wonder what would go on the list is all I'm saying. But I think we can certainly, if there was, we can give information on, for example, what briefings we've sent out to all members, which is an equivalent to a report for noting. So we can say in the last period we have sent out X, updates on this. There have been member briefings on this. And then if this group decides they wish to have more information about any of them, that would be, but that would be what it is.
I'm very grateful. I think we're on the same page, Lewis. I think we're actually on the same page. It's just if it's in the Constitution, unless the chairman agrees, I won't be able to say, can I propose that we get a report on that item in full to this committee? Because I'm not allowed to give a motion without notice, without the chair's permission. And that's curtailing the ability of I just think it's curtailing the ability of ordinary members to be able to ask for something in a formal way, unless it's on that list of motions without notice.
Thank you. I've now got Councillor Palmer, please.
Thank you, Chair. On the licensing training, I think training is very important. Actually, I think on the licensing committee, whether you can force members to do training if there's no legal requirement to do, but I think training is important because the more informed that members are, the better the outcome and decision-making process will be. And that's important for our community, our residents, but it's also important for those who are affected by decisions made by the licensing committee. I agree with Councillor Vane when he says, all members could do the training because it leaves you better informed. However, I feel that the Licensing Act 2013, to answer Councillor Whiting's point, is specific when it says 3 members drawn from the licensing committee. So I think the 2013 Act clarifies why it has to be 3 members from the licensing committee. But I think it's also important to define training. What is training? What is training to this council? I could go on the internet and I can read this Cornerstone article on licensing. Is that suitable training? I could watch a video on it from the local government organisation. Is that suitable training? I have just read a book from a solicitor that says all about the Licensing Act 2013. Is that suitable training? What training does this council feel is suitable, and how do we know it's suitable? I could have done an online course with Fred Bloggs down the road. So we need, I think, in the Constitution, a definition of training and how it's to be provided. So I don't think I can support Amendment 3 because I think it is a bit vague. I think there are issues, and I agree with Councillor Whiting. I think there are issues because I voted to come away from the cabinet system because I feel that gives members more input. But I do feel that sometimes you get lots of reports coming through just for noting because you can't do anything about it. This is the performance, this is the standard we've met, can you just note it? But you should have the right, and you do in the Constitution, to ask questions of officers and get feedback from that. So actually, it might actually increase work for officers because you could have 47 members writing and asking questions on an article that you said normally would be noted, and someone at a meeting asks us a question, then you think, well, I was going to ask that, and you get the answer and it satisfies 47 people. So there are pros and cons, but in all, I could support Amendment 1. And the same, yeah, I can understand, but I can support that. So I think the vote should actually be split across the amendments because I can't support Amendment 3 because I don't feel that there's a good suitable definition of what training is. So I think that should be there. And I also think that we really need to think carefully. We should strongly recommend all members to take part in licensing training. And a failure to do so, I think, would lead or may lead to further or may affect decision making going down the line. And I do agree with the contract standing orders. What was said, the limit is a bit high, but I would vote for that one because I feel what the officer said. And I think it's so I can support 3 of them. I don't think I can support Amendment 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison, please.
Thank you, Chair. Amendment 1, I have raised religiously all the time I've been on the council, and indeed I raised when I was down at County Hall. If we have a meeting in July, which gives you a budget report, July, which gives you the latest position up until the end of March, and you start asking questions, and it's, oh no, it's changed since then. Oh no, it's changed since then. And I kept saying in all these areas, I've said, but can't we alter the committee structure so that the committee takes the report, you know, fairly near to the end of that quarter? On the basis that I agree I'm a dinosaur, but you keep telling me, you know, you just press the button and it comes out. It's all, I know they do argue then. Yeah, then they get into the technicalities. But if everything's going in on the system, it shouldn't take too much to press it out a couple of days later, so we've got the most up-to-date stuff. I've kept being told over the years by both authorities that, oh, no, it don't work like that, Councillor Miss Harrison. And so we've got to this stage where, you know, September is the end of a quarter. We would get the report to us around about December. That's no good to me. You've had another 2 months worth of spending. Well, we can't do it any sooner. So what is the point? You know, you could pore over it as I used to do. I still do, but not to that extent. You could pore over it and have all these questions, and it's, oh no, it's not like that now because that was 2 months ago. So it's actually a waste of our time to have out-of-date information presented to us. So I didn't have a problem with number 1. On number 2, the item for noting, I think that it is more. I read this and I thought, God, what's it mean? Let's take something. We on Housing and Health, we will be having a regular report on the budget for the temporary accommodation. It's absolutely key. But I wouldn't think, oh, let's have a report telling us how many we got every month, every 2 months. Well, what does it matter how many we got? We've told you what we're doing in overall, what measures we're trying to take to get it and the money down. You can't make a decision on that because we haven't got a choice. It's a legal thing. But I wouldn't have a problem if the officer wrote round at the end of each month saying, just to let you all know the latest TA figures are X, just so that we've got it in mind when it's all over the news. It's every council in the country. It'd be nice that we knew where we were in comparison, but it's not that something we could make a decision to say, well, let's stop it. We've got that choice. So that's what a decision is. And that's what a for noting report is. So if the officer wrote around every month and said, just to let you know, at the end of, where are we? The end of November, TA was X. Thank you very much. That's, you know, gives us some info. So I'm not sure if that's what that means, but that's how I read it. On number 3, I raised this in the first place. There are members of this council who can manage to get to a 7 o'clock meeting. What they can't do is get to a 10 o'clock in the morning meeting. So we are discriminating against people who work or have responsibilities by saying you can only sit on the licensing committee if you do the training to sit on a hearing. You do not need training to sit on a licensing committee. It is a policy committee, the same as this is a policy committee. How many of us have had training to sit on the Policy and Resources Committee? Right. So if we want to go down that path, then that's up to members. I suppose also on training. So that was the reason I raised it in the first place. On training over many years, I've seen people go along to training. They might as well have wasted their time for how much they managed to tune in and learn what was being offered, because they just simply did not put it into practice. So, you know, this business, oh, if you haven't been trained, you can't do that. Well, you know, some things are legal and you've got to, and other things, but don't necessarily say, oh, unless you've been trained, you can't do that. I sat on the original licensing training on this council when we set up the licensing committee. It was a whole day, and I mean a whole day. We were here at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I think we finished at 5. And then I respect you had the right to make the decision. It was, oh no, let's do a 3-hour session in the evening. Well, as far as I'm concerned, I spent a whole day here. I was absolutely, you know, by the time we left. If it's okay for you to do 3 hours, why was it okay for me to spend the whole day here? And I thought we were diminishing the role of the licensing, which is why I stopped going to the training on that. Because we had a highly trained professional gave us that, made sure we knew exactly what we were doing and when and all the rest of it. So as far as training is concerned, you know, it's horses for courses. But I do think, you know, I do want this bottomed out for the licensing committee. To go to a 7 o'clock meeting, you shouldn't need to have ticked the box for the training. And the last one, which was the amendment for, Lisa explained it numerous times, and I eventually got it. So I'm quite happy with that. Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Bonnie, Henderson and Lehman to come back. I just want to bring Mr Harris in, please.
Thank you, Chairman. So in respect of the Licensing Act 2003, which then gives you the subcommittees which deal with alcohol, entertainment and late night refreshment, Section 9 of that Act requires that members are drawn from the Licensing Committee. So it's drawn at the minute that all subcommittees are drawn from membership of the licensing committee, but there is also the general licensing subcommittees. They theoretically could come from the wider council because it's only, as far as I'm aware, the Licensing Act 2003 that has that prescription.
Thank you. Councillor Bonnie, please.
Is everyone clear with that answer? Because I'm not sure I'm entirely. Can you repeat the last bit? So,
so the Licensing Act 2003 deals with alcohol, entertainment, late night refreshment.
Yeah.
That is, and it has a separate licensing regime. That is the act that requires that subcommittees are drawn from the membership of the overall panel. So in respect of the amendment that is at the minute, whereby subcommittees are drawn from membership of the licensing committee, that is consistent with the Licensing Act 2003. However, all the other sorts of licensing are dealt with by a general committee, and the licensing comes from a variety of different legislative, I can't even say the word now, legislative sources. And so those sources do not require necessarily that the membership is drawn from the overall panel. So a general licensing subcommittee could potentially be drawn from any council member.
okay, right. On that note then, thank you. Right. So let's do with that amendment first then, Amendment 3. Can we be clear what we mean by training? Because some of us, you know, participate in other outside bodies, other functions, school governors, you know, and in professional fields where you have training. And in order to meet the letter of the law, you do your training online, you do a test, and at the end of it, you do a competency test to show that you've understood where you've been trained. I think Councillor Palmer was right, is can anyone reading something, does that mean they've had suitable training? Because we've got lots of different fields here. We've got planning, we've got licensing, we've got other specialities. And I think we need to have an understanding of what training means and where you can undertake it. So whether it's within the council by a specialist officer, whether it's with a third party that's specialist in that field, or whether you can just go online to a dedicated resource. But I think training is kind of bandied around sometimes as a bit of a flimsy, and there is no definition of it. And I think we've got to be careful that we are making sure that people are doing the right sort of training and that people aren't going off willy-nilly. So if we could have a clarification about that, and then I'll
Can
come
I
back
just
to
bring
that.
Mr. Harris in again, please?
Thank you, Chair. So absolutely. So the Constitution Working Group was very alive to this issue. And that's why the Constitution Working Group on this occasion only sought to change the licensing bit so that members of the subcommittee required to be trained rather than the whole committee. But then rather than go through and change all the other references to training in the Constitution, felt that it was appropriate that this committee decide whether or not, for example, we did adopt that approach, or whether or not this committee was potentially to ask Democratic Services to bring a paper forward on member training more widely. And my personal view, for what it's worth, is that it's a Democratic Services matter to come forward with a paper that discusses training more widely so that you can come to that sort of decision as a committee. So that's the second recommendation on the paper, is to consider whether you'd like that to come forwards, or whether you would be happy for the Constitution Working Group to continue going through the Constitution and just address every item where it says there's training and come to a decision on it. My view is it's better to have a holistic approach to member training provided by Dem Services.
Yeah,
Thank you. Sorry, Councillor Henson, could you just, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I think we just need some clarification around that. Because we do stipulate about having training, and we do need to stick to that, because I do think otherwise people run off and don't understand the implication of what they're, even if it's in a policy term, you can, if you're not aware of the wider issues and the very specific issues around licensing, to then make decisions on policy, granted we'll get some legal guidance, but they need to understand that, I think, to make the best decision on those policies. So I think we need that needs to be narrowed down much more. I totally understand contract standing orders on contracts increasing the value limit. Committee system isn't particularly helpful when looking at numbers, especially the cycle, or it's not a very frequent cycle. So we do need to give some capacity in that so that we can run effectively as a business, which service provider, and the others, a group I don't really have a great problem with, but I do want some clarification around training.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry I didn't get my hand up a great deal quicker this item, because I might have directed us in a different way. Until May this year, we have had for many years a member development working group. Not quite sure why it's just not called a member training group, but it's always been called a member development working group. And it has done a lot of very good work over certainly 15 or 20 years. It has always been a group which has been, as it were, non-party political, so that there has always been a member of each political group on the group, and it's able to talk about training needs with people who usually have some quite specific knowledge of training. And I would self in that. My first question is, why has that member development working group disappeared since May 23? My second question is, can it please be reorganized as quickly as possible? And can I then say, can we put a lot of these training issues to that group to make decisions or make recommendations of what we determine as being adequate training? Because certainly since May, we have had lots and lots of 1 hour training sessions, and we had one this evening which I thought was well organised. It was allowed for 3/4 of an hour, and Lisa and co had clearly worked out what they could tell us in 3/4 an hour, but I would not have called that a training session. I would have called it a briefing or something similar. And I think we need to understand how long briefing sessions need to be. So can I please get a feedback on the member development working group?
Thank you. Yeah.
So I think that the things that you say can be absolutely properly done by the member development working group. I think it was doing quite a lot before the election, and then following the election hasn't. So I will talk to the Democratic Elections Manager to get it reinvigorated. I will say we did, and you will know this, we did struggle a little bit with membership, with members actually coming to the group. So we would ask that, it's what we get out is as good as what we put in. So.
Thank you. Councillor Boyne, please.
Thank you. Allow me to come back. It's a point of clarification in terms of where we might be going with this. And I'm trying to avoid us going down a rabbit hole, which could be potentially difficult to come out of. If in terms of the recommendation, it's asking us to agree the amendments and then refer those to full council. If we do not agree those amendments, then in effect, does that decision therefore preclude us from doing anything else, because it still was a decision, although not to progress for 6 months? And to avoid that from happening, would it be better at this point to say, let's refer this back to the Constitutional Working Group and take no further discussion, no further action, or make that I will propose that to be the recommendation, that on certainly it's filled on one of the amendments, that's maybe the preferred option, to refer it back, rather than I say we do agree or we don't agree. But so let's just bat it back, given the feedback, and for them to consider everything that's been said tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Bourne. I've got Councillor Lehman, please.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to come back on the Amendment 3 point. We've had a lot of talk about how we define training, and that's largely irrelevant to the change that's being made here. What Councillor Harrison has already explained why this change has been made, and it is being made so that people who sit on the licensing committee who don't necessarily have time to sit on any of the panels can attend that licensing committee without that formal training. There's only been one licensing committee meeting since May, and at that we had appropriate training that wasn't licensing committee training prior to that meeting that evening, so that the members of the committee were informed on the specific things that were up on the agenda that evening, and I imagine that will be the case going forward as well. So I don't see any reason why we should vote against this, but equally, if members feel that we require further definition on training, are we able to vote this through and then ask for it to be revisited at the Constitution Working Group? Thank you.
I wasn't too sure if Councillor Bowen was actually making an amendment towards amendment number 3. I think that's what you were talking about, to send it back to the Constitutional Working Group. If that was a proposal, then I'm quite happy to second that.
That was certainly where I was leading, yes.
Mr. Harris, please.
For the purposes of clarity, I think that Councillor Lehman has picked up this very point. Amendment 3 seeks merely to change it so that the licensing committee doesn't have to have training, and actually it's recommendation 2, which is getting a steer from this committee in relation to how we should deal with member training more widely, is the second recommendation and isn't actually subject to the amendment. The amendment's just about licensing, and actually the Constitution Working Group did that on purpose because we understood that this wider issue of training was probably a bigger issue than we wanted to try and address through one amendment of the Constitution.
I'm sorry, members. Councillor Gibson isn't well, as you may have heard, so he's leaving the meeting. I need to ask for nominations for a chair, please.
Nominate Councillor Harrison, please.
Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Do I have any other nominations for chair? Okay, can all those in favour of Councillor Harrison please raise? That's unanimous. I do understand it is on the understanding that you go to bed and get well.
Sorry, I was giving you a lift home.
Give my good lady a call. Yeah, thank you, and apologies, members.
Robin, you take him. I can do this. Yeah. Robin's taking you. Robin's taking you. No argument. So, Chair. It's all right. We'll sort it if you. That's sorted.
Can I suggest a shorter German?
Yeah. Whatever. Thank you, members.